When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I remember that moment so clearly. The way the morning light was coming through the kitchen window. The smell of the coffee she had just made. She stood there by the sink, her arms crossed over her chest, and she said the words I had been dreading for months. She said, "We think it's time for you to find your own place, Mom." And I just looked at her. I looked at this woman I had welcomed into my home, into my family, into my heart, over 10 years ago. I remembered the first time my son brought her to meet me. How nervous she was. How I held her hands and told her she was now my daughter. And now here she was telling me to leave. So I smiled. I folded the dish towel I was holding and placed it neatly on the counter. I smoothed down the front of my apron. And I said, "Okay, sweetheart. I understand." But inside, a part of me was breaking. A very deep part. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a strange, quiet sadness. A loneliness that felt as cold as the winter outside. I wasn't surprised. I had seen the signs. The whispers between them that would stop when I walked into the room. The way my son wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. The dinners that got quieter and quieter. But hearing the words out loud, spoken in the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for my family, it was like a door closing. A heavy, solid door. And I knew, once it closed, it would never open again. I looked past her, towards the living room, where my son was sitting on the sofa, looking at his phone. He hadn't come into the kitchen. He hadn't said a word. He just sat there, pretending he couldn't hear. And I thought to myself, when was the last time he said he loved me? His name is Mark. My only child. My son. I was 32 when I had him. A little late for back then. His father, my husband David, he was so happy. He cried in the delivery room. He held Mark in his big, clumsy hands like he was holding the most precious thing in the universe. And he was. We were a simple family. We didn't have much money, but we had so much love. David worked at the hardware store in town. I stayed home with Mark until he started school, and then I got a job at the local library. I loved that job. Being surrounded by books, helping children find their next great adventure. It felt right. Mark was a good boy. He was a little shy, a little sensitive. He had his father's kind eyes and my nervous energy. He would come home from school and tell me everything. Every detail. Who got in trouble. What they had for lunch. The new game they played at recess. He would sit at this very kitchen table, the same one I'm looking at now in my memory, and he would talk while I made him an after-school snack. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cut into triangles. He always liked them cut into triangles. I remember one time he came home crying. He was about 7. A bigger boy had pushed him down on the playground. I held him on my lap right here in this kitchen. I wiped his tears and I told him, "It's okay to be sad, my love. It's okay to cry. But you are strong. You are stronger than you know." He looked up at me with those big, wet eyes and he said, "I love you, Mama." And my heart just melted into a puddle on the floor. Those were the golden years. The years when a mother's love is enough. When you can fix every scraped knee with a kiss and every broken heart with a hug. I thought it would always be that way. I thought the bond between a mother and son was unbreakable. I was wronged. As Mark grew up, things started to change, slowly. It's natural, I know. Boys become men. They pull away. They need their independence. David would tell me, "Leave him be, Helen. He's finding his own way." And I tried. I really did. He got his first car, a rusty old Ford, and suddenly he didn't need me to drive him to his friend's house anymore. He got a part-time job at the grocery store, and he had his own money. He started spending more time in his room. The door closed. The music would be playing loud. When I'd knock and ask if he wanted dinner, he'd just shout, "In a minute, Mom." That minute could turn into an hour.
But he still needed me.
I knew he did. I would leave his favorite meal on the kitchen counter for him when he came home late. I would wash his work uniform and leave it folded on the end of his bed. I would put a $20 bill in his jacket pocket when I knew he was going out with his friends. Little things. Mother things. When David got sick, that's when everything really changed.
Mark was 22.
He was just starting to build his own life. He had a girlfriend, a few different ones, and he was talking about maybe going to community college. Then David was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was fast.
So fast.
I became a full-time caregiver. My life shrunk to the size of our house, to David's hospital bed that we set up in the living room. Mark was there, but he was also not there. He would come home, sit with his father for a few minutes, looking uncomfortable and scared. Then he would disappear to his room or go out. I was so focused on David, on the endless cycle of doctors and medication and pain, that I didn't have the energy to focus on Mark. The night David died, it was just the two of us. Me and him. He waited until Mark had gone out. I think he knew. He didn't want his son to see him go. He squeezed my hand so weakly and he whispered, "Take care of our boy." And then he was gone.
Just like that.
35 years of marriage. Over in a breath. I sat with him for a long time, just holding his hand, until it started to get cold. Then I called the doctor. I called the funeral home. And then I called Mark. He answered on the third ring. I could hear music and voices in the background. "Mom? What's up?" he said, his voice a little slurred. "Mark," I said, my voice so steady it surprised me. "You need to come home. Your father is gone." There was silence. On the other end of the line, just static. Then a small, choked sound.
What?
"Come home, son," I said. And I hung up. He was home in 15 minutes. He burst through the door, his face pale. He looked at the empty bed, the machines that were now silent. He looked at me, sitting alone in the dark. And he just crumpled. He came and sat on the floor by my feet, and he put his head in my lap, and he sobbed. He was my little boy again. I stroked his hair, and I rocked him, just like I did when he was 7 and fell off his bike. And in that moment, I thought, we will get through this. We have each other. But grief is a strange thing. It brings some people together, and it drives others apart. After the funeral, after all the casseroles and the kind words had been eaten and forgotten, a new silence filled the house. A heavier silence. Mark started staying out even more. He wouldn't talk about his father. It was like he had built a wall around the whole subject. And I was on the other side of it. Then Sarah came into his life. And for a while, it felt like the sun had come back out. He met her at the grocery store. She was a cashier there. Pretty, with a bright, easy smile. When he first brought her home for dinner, I was so nervous. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to find love. I made a pot roast, his father's favorite recipe. Sarah was polite, a little quiet at first. She complimented the food, which I appreciated. She told me about her family, her job, her plans to go back to school for nursing. She seemed sensible.
Kind.
And the way Mark looked at her, I hadn't seen that look on his face since he was a little boy. He looked happy. He looked whole. A part of me, a tiny, selfish part, felt a pang of jealousy. I was no longer the most important woman in his life. But I pushed that feeling down. I told myself this was good. This was how it was supposed to be. They got married 2 years later. A small, simple ceremony in a park. It was beautiful. I stood there, watching my son, in his simple suit, pledge his life to this woman. And I thought of David. I thought of how proud he would have been. I cried, of course. Happy tears. And when Mark came over to me after the ceremony, he gave me a big hug and he whispered in my ear, "Thanks, Mom, for everything. I love you." I held on to him a little tighter, a little longer. I didn't know then that it would be one of the last times I would ever hear those words. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment in the next town over, about 40 minutes away. We talked on the phone a few times a week. We saw each other for holidays and birthdays. It was a good distance.
I was happy for them.
I was building my own life, too. I had my friends from the library, my book club, my garden. I was learning to be alone without David. It was hard, but I was managing. Then the best news came. Sarah was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. My heart felt like it would burst. I started knitting that very day. A soft, blue blanket. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but blue felt right. When little Noah was born, I drove to the hospital as fast as I could, my heart pounding. I was so excited. I walked into the room and there they were. Sarah, tired but glowing, holding this tiny, perfect bundle. Mark, looking down at his son with an expression of pure wonder. It was the same look David had when he held Mark for the first time. I walked over, my eyes already filling with tears. "Oh, he's beautiful," I whispered. "He's just perfect." I reached out my arms, instinctively, the way a grandmother does. I wanted to hold my grandson. I wanted to smell his new baby smell. I wanted to feel his tiny weight in my arms. But Sarah shifted, just slightly. She turned her body away from me, protecting the baby. She said, "He's a little fussy right now. Maybe later." I pulled my arms back. I felt a little sting, a tiny prickle of something I didn't want to name. I told myself it was just new mom. Nerves. I told myself she was tired and overwhelmed. I told myself everything was fine. In the months that followed, I saw my grandson, but never as much as I wanted to. I would call and offer to come over to help. "I can watch him for an hour, so you can take a nap, Sarah. I can bring over a casserole for dinner. I can just sit with him while you do the laundry." The answers were always the same. "Oh, that's okay, Helen. We're fine.
He's just about to go down for a nap."
Mark is home tonight. Maybe next weekend." The invitations to their house became less frequent. Instead, we would meet for lunch at a neutral restaurant, a place in the middle. I would get to hold Noah for a few minutes while we waited for our food. I would play with him, make him laugh. I loved those moments. They were like small sips of water in a desert. But they were never enough.
Mark started to change.
He became quieter around me, more distant. When I would call, our conversations were short.
Mom.
Everything's fine. Noah's good. Work's busy. Gotta go." I tried to tell him a story about my day, about a funny thing that happened at the library, and I could feel him pulling away, getting impatient. I remember one conversation, about 2 years after Noah was born. I mentioned I was thinking of coming to visit the following Saturday.
There was a long pause on the line.
"Saturday's not great, Mom," he said. "We have plans." "What kind of plans?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just plans. With some friends. It's a busy weekend." Another pause. "Listen, Mom, we'll call you, okay? Gotta go." And he hung up. He didn't say, "I love you." He hadn't said it in a while. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. And for the first time, a dark, scary thought entered my mind. They don't want me anymore, and I tried to ignore that thought. I tried to be a good mother and a good mother-in-law. I never complained. I never pushed. I never showed them how much their distance was hurting me. I smiled on the phone. I sent cards for every occasion. I always brought a small gift when I saw Noah. I tried to be the perfect, easygoing grandma. But the tension was building. It was like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first, but eventually, you're riding on the rim. The morning Sarah told me to leave, it was the final blowout. I had driven over early that day. Mark had called the night before and asked if I could help out. Sarah wasn't feeling well, and he had to go into work for a few hours. "Could you just come over and keep an eye on Noah?" he asked. "Just for a couple of hours." He sounded stressed. I said yes immediately. Of course. Finally, a chance to be useful. I got there around 8 in the morning. Sarah was in the kitchen, looking pale and tired. She barely looked at me when I walked in. She just nodded towards the living room where Noah, now almost 4, was watching cartoons. "He's had breakfast," she said flatly. "Mark will be back by 11. "That's fine, sweetheart," I said, taking off my coat. "You go lie down. I've got this." She just walked past me and went upstairs. No thank you. No smile. I had a wonderful morning with Noah. We built a tower with his blocks. We read 3 books. We drew pictures of elephants. He was such a bright, happy little boy. He had his father's eyes, my David's eyes. While he was drawing, he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, will you come to my birthday party?" My heart skipped a beat. "When is your birthday, sweetie?"
"Next week," he said.
"Mommy says we're having a party with all my friends from school." I smiled at him. "Well, I would love to come to your party, Noah." I hadn't been invited yet, but I assumed I would be. He was my grandson. Of course I would be at his birthday party. When Mark came home, he looked surprised to see me still there. It was almost noon. "Oh, hey, Mom. Thanks." He went straight to the kitchen. I followed him, wanting to tell him about my morning, about Noah. "He's such a joy, Mark," I started. "We had the best time. He was telling me about his birthday party next week." Mark tensed up immediately. He opened the refrigerator and started looking inside, his back to me. "Yeah," he mumbled. "It's just a little party for his friends from school." "I would love to come," I said, my voice hopeful. He closed the refrigerator door and turned to face me. He looked uncomfortable. It's at a kids' play place, Mom. It's really small. Just the kids and a few of their parents. It's kind of chaotic." "That's okay," I said, my smile starting to feel a little forced. "I can handle a little chaos. I'd love to see him with his friends." Just then, Sarah came down the stairs. She must have been listening. She walked into the kitchen and stood by the sink. She looked from Mark to me, and she knew exactly what we were talking about. "Mom wants to come to Noah's party," Mark said, his voice small. Sarah's face didn't change. It was completely blank. She looked at me. "It's really not a good idea, Helen. It's for his little friends. You'd be the only grandma there. It might confuse him." Confuse him? The words hung in the air. How would my presence confuse my own grandson? "I don't mind being the only grandma," I said softly. "I just want to be there for him." Sarah sighed, a long, weary sigh. She exchanged a look with Mark, a look I couldn't read. Then she said the words that broke everything. "Mark and I have been talking," she said. "And we think it's time for you to find your own place, Mom. We need our space as a family. We need to breathe." My own place. I was in their kitchen. I was standing there in my son's house, and she was telling me to find my own place. She wasn't talking about the party anymore. She was talking about my entire place in their lives. I looked at my son. He was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't defend me. He wouldn't say a word. And that's when I smiled. I looked at Sarah and I smiled. I folded the dish towel. I smoothed my apron. I said, "Okay, sweetheart. I understand." I walked out of the kitchen. I walked past Mark, and he still wouldn't look at me. I got my coat. I went to the living room to say goodbye to Noah. He was still drawing at the little table. "I have to go now, sweetie," I said, kneeling down beside him. My voice was a little wobbly, but I held it together. "Okay, Grandma," he said, not looking up from his drawing. "I love you." My heart shattered into a million pieces. A 4-year-old boy, my grandson, said he loved me. My own son, a grown man, couldn't. I leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "I love you too, Noah. More than you'll ever know." And I left. I walked out of that house, down the front steps, and got into my car. I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt hollow. Like everything inside me had been scooped out. The following weeks and months were the hardest of my life. Harder than losing David. Because with David, the love was still there. It was just on the other side. This was different. This was a living loss. My son was still alive, but our relationship was dead. I sold the house. I couldn't stay there. Every room held a memory that now felt like a lie. I found a small, 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was quiet. Too quiet. I brought my kitchen table. I brought my photo albums. I brought the blue blanket I had knitted for Noah. That's all I needed. Mark called me a few times after that day. The conversations were short and painful. He never mentioned what Sarah had said. He never apologized. He just asked how I was doing in a flat, distant voice. And I would say I was fine in the same flat, distant voice. The love was gone, replaced by a polite, painful silence. I didn't go to Noah's birthday party. I wasn't invited. I sent a present, a big box of art supplies, with a card that said, "Love, Grandma." I never heard if he got it. I never heard if he liked it. Months passed. Then a year. I would see them sometimes from a distance. At the grocery store, I once saw Sarah with Noah, who is bigger now. I ducked down an aisle, so they wouldn't see me. I couldn't face it. The pain of seeing them, of being so close yet so far, was too much. I spent a lot of time alone, thinking, remembering. I would go through my old photo albums and trace the lines of my son's face as a baby, a toddler, a young man. I would wonder where I went wrong. Was I too clingy? Too needy? Did I not give him enough space? Did I say something wrong? The questions would circle in my head, over and over, like a carousel that wouldn't stop. I wrote him letters. Long, heartfelt letters, telling him I loved him, that I missed him, that I would do anything to make things right. I never sent them. I was afraid of the rejection. I was afraid he would read them and just throw them away. I was afraid of making things worse. So I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. A shoebox full of unsent love. 2 years.
It was 2 years before I saw him again.
It was a rainy Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting in my small living room, watching the news, when there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely did anymore. I shuffled to the door, my old knees aching, and I opened it. And there he was. My son,
Mark.
He was soaking wet from the rain. He looked thinner than I remembered. His face was pale, and his eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept, like he had been crying. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The years of silence hung between us, a heavy, invisible wall. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, broken. Mom. Just one word. But the way he said it, it wasn't the distant, polite voice from the phone calls. It was the voice of my little boy. The voice that said Mama when he was scared or hurt. I stepped aside without a word and let him in. He walked into my tiny apartment. He looked around at the familiar furniture from the old house, the photos on the wall. He stopped in front of a picture of his father and me on our wedding day.
He turned to me.
I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. And then he broke down. He just fell apart right there in my living room. He sank onto my sofa, put his face in his hands, and his whole body shook with sobs. I sat down next to him. I didn't say anything. I just put my arm around his shoulders, the way I had when he was a little boy, and I held him. It took a long time for him to be able to talk. The rain beat against the window. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Finally, he took a deep, shuddering breath and he began to tell me, "It was me, Mom," he said, his voice full of pain. It was all me, not Sarah. It was me. I just listened. I held his hand, and I listened. He told me how after Dad died, he didn't know how to deal with the grief. He felt so lost. And looking at me, seeing my own grief, reminded him of the pain. So he pushed me away. It was easier than facing it. He built that wall to protect himself. He told me that when he met Sarah, he thought he could start over. He could build a new family, a new life, and leave the pain of the past behind. And in a way that meant leaving me behind too. He told me that Sarah wasn't the one driving us apart.
He was.
Every time I called, he would make an excuse to get off the phone. Every time I offered to visit, he would tell Sarah to say they were busy. He was the one who made the rules. He was the one who created the distance. Sarah was just following his lead, trying to be a good wife, trying to protect the family he said he wanted. I was a coward, Mom, he sobbed. I was a weak, selfish coward. I made Sarah be the bad guy. I made her do the dirty work. I stood there in that kitchen and let her tell you to leave because I didn't have the guts to do it myself. I broke your heart to save myself from a little bit of pain. And I've hated myself for it every single day since. He told me that after I left, things between him and Sarah got worse. The guilt and the shame ate away at him. He became distant from her too. They started fighting. The marriage that he had sacrificed his relationship with his mother for, it started to crumble. They tried counseling. They tried to fix it. But the foundation was rotten. It was built on his lies and his cowardice. They're separated, Mom, he whispered. Sarah and Noah moved out 3 months ago. She went to stay with her sister in another state. I get Noah on weekends. When I can. He finally looked up at me, his eyes full of a pain I had never seen before. I've lost my wife. I barely get to see my son. I've lost my family. And I realized, standing in my empty house last night, that I lost the one person who has always, always loved me, no matter what. I lost my mother. And it's all my fault. He squeezed my hand so tight. Mom, I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't have the right to ask. But can you ever forgive me? Can you ever love me again? I looked at my son. My boy,
Mark.
He was a grown man, broken and ashamed, sitting on my sofa, asking for my forgiveness. And in that moment, all the pain, all the loneliness, all the years of silence, they just melted away. They didn't disappear, not completely. The scars will always be there. But the anger, the hurt, they were replaced by something much stronger.
Love.
I cupped his face in my hands, the same way I did when he was a child. I wiped his tears with my thumbs. Oh, my sweet boy, I said, my voice soft and full of love. Of course I forgive you. I forgave you the moment you walked through that door. I've loved you since the day you were born, and I will love you until the day I die. There is nothing you could ever do that would make me stop loving you. Nothing. He let out a sound, a sob of relief, and he leaned into me. I held him, right there on that sofa, and we cried together. We cried for David. We cried for the lost years. We cried for the pain we had both caused each other. And we cried for the healing that was just beginning. That was a year ago. It hasn't been easy. Healing a wound that deep takes time. A lot of time. And a lot of patience. We talk on the phone every day now. Short calls sometimes, but they always end the same way. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Mark. I hear it every time now. And it fills a hole in my heart I thought would be empty forever. Mark comes over for dinner every Sunday. It's our special time. I make his favorites. Pot roast, like tonight. Mashed potatoes. The apple pie he loved as a boy. He's started to look healthier. The sadness is still in his eyes sometimes, but there's a light there now too. And look who's here. Mark brought someone special with him today.
Noah.
My grandson. He's so big now. He has his daddy's eyes, my David's eyes. Mark gives me a kiss on the cheek. Smells good, Mom.
He
hands me a bottle of wine. For later. Noah is hiding a little behind his dad's leg, peeking out at me. I kneel down, my old knees complaining a little, and I open my arms.
Sweat.
I'm so happy to see you. He looks up at his dad, who gives him an encouraging nod. Then he looks back at me, a little smile creeping onto his face. He runs those few steps and gives me a big hug. He wraps his little arms around my neck. Hi, Grandma, he whispers in my ear. I love you. And there it is. The words I thought I'd never hear again. From my son, and now from his son.
Love.
Life is a funny thing. It breaks your heart in ways you never imagined. It takes you to the deepest, darkest valleys. But if you're very lucky, it also gives you a way back. It gives you a second chance. My second chance is sitting right here at my kitchen table. My son, who I thought I had lost forever. And his son, who I am just beginning to know. We are a family again. A little battered, a little scarred, but together. The last time my son said he loved me, it was today, right before dinner. And I have a feeling, a strong, hopeful feeling, that it won't be the last time. Not anymore. Love, real love, doesn't give up. It just waits. It waits in the quiet spaces, in the old photographs, in the unsent letters. It waits for a knock on the door on a rainy Tuesday night. And when that door opens, it's ready. Ready to forgive. Ready to heal. Ready to start again.